Welcome to Bedtime Horror, your portal to scary stories. Let me take you back to a night that still gives me the creeps whenever I think about it. I'm a veteran police officer, seen my fair share of weird and wild stuff, but this one, well, it stands out. It all happened on Elm Street, of all places. It was a typical quiet evening in our small town when a call came in. A disturbance at a house on Elm Street, to be exact. Now, Elm Street isn't known for anything sinister. It's your average suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where you'd expect folks to be asleep by 9 p.m. But that night, well, it was different. The call was a doozy. Neighbors reported hearing blood-curdling screams coming from that house late at night, and they were concerned. Who wouldn't be, right? So, they did the right thing and called us. I headed over to Elm Street, and let me tell you, the closer I got to that house, the stranger the atmosphere felt. I mean, I'd been on edge before, but this was different. It was like a shiver ran down my spine as I pulled up to the house. The house was dark, no lights were on. The street was empty, with no signs of life. It was eerily silent, and that's when I knew something wasn't right. My gut, the cop's intuition they talk about, well, it was telling me there was more to this than met the eye. I approached the front door, my heart pounding. I rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. I knocked, louder this time, but still nothing. I could feel the tension building in the air. It was one of those moments where you start to second-guess yourself and wonder if you're just being paranoid. But then, as I was about to give it up and call it a false alarm, I noticed something strange. There was a closed door leading to the basement, and it seemed out of place. It was like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. That door, it drew me in like a moth to a flame. I knew I couldn't leave without checking it out. So, I tried the doorknob, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. The stairs led down into darkness, and I took a deep breath, ready to face whatever I might find in that basement. That decision, well, it changed everything. As I descended those creaky basement stairs, I pulled out my flashlight and flicked it on, casting a narrow beam of light into the inky blackness below. The steps groaned with each cautious descent, as if they were trying to warn me of what lay ahead. The basement itself was the stuff of nightmares, dimly lit and filled with dusty old furniture draped in white sheets, like ghosts lurking in the shadows. It felt as if I'd stepped into a time capsule, frozen in some forgotten era. My flashlight's beam danced across the room until it landed on that mysterious door I'd seen from upstairs. My heart pounded in my chest. I approached it slowly, my boots whispering against the concrete floor. With trembling hands, I turned the doorknob, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit corridor. The air grew colder, and I could feel an unsettling presence, like someone watching me from the shadows. I followed the corridor until it opened into a small room, and what I saw there, well, it's an image that's forever etched in my memory. There, in the corner, huddled on a makeshift bed, was a woman. She looked like a ghost herself, pale, malnourished, and trembling. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment, I could see the terror etched on her face. She didn't speak a word, but those eyes, they said everything. She'd been through hell, and it was evident in her haunted gaze. I called for backup immediately, and within moments, my fellow officers arrived. They rushed the woman to safety, wrapping her in a blanket and providing reassurance. I stayed behind to secure the scene, still trying to process what had just unfolded. The woman's rescue was the beginning of a long and harrowing investigation. We learned her horrifying story. She'd been held captive in that basement for years, subjected to unspeakable horrors. She had managed to maintain silence all that time, a desperate attempt to survive. As for the house's occupants, well, they were taken into custody, and the truth came to light. The captors were part of a human trafficking ring, one of the darkest underbellies of society. They had chosen Elm Street, an ordinary suburban neighborhood, as the perfect cover for their sinister operation. The screams the neighbors had heard, they weren't exaggerated tales of paranoia. They were real cries for help, the kind that had gone unanswered for far too long. That night, it was the persistence of one officer, a nagging feeling that something just wasn't right, that had uncovered the unimaginable. The captors were arrested, and the woman, well, she was finally free. Her bravery and silent determination had saved her life, but it also served as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk just beneath the surface of the most ordinary places. I'll never forget that night on Elm Street, where the ordinary turned into something out of a nightmare, and where the resilience of the human spirit prevailed in the face of unspeakable evil. It's a story that still gives me chills, even as I recount it now. I was a young police officer, full of nerves and excitement about my first real assignment. It was a dark and stormy night when I got the call about the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The dispatcher's voice crackled with unease as she explained that there had been reports of strange noises coming from the old, decrepit building. With my partner by my side, we set out on a journey that would change the course of my career. As we approached the warehouse, the rain poured down, drenching us to the bone. The building loomed before us, an imposing structure that seemed to have witnessed its fair share of secrets. Its windows were shattered, and the place looked like it hadn't seen life in decades. My partner and I cautiously stepped inside, our flashlights cutting through the thick darkness. The air was thick with dust and a musty smell that made my skin crawl. We exchanged nervous glances, but our training had taught us to suppress our fear and move forward. The strange noises grew louder as we ventured deeper into the warehouse. At first, it was just creaks and groans, the kind you'd expect from an old building. But then, we heard something that sent shivers down my spine. A faint whispering, like voices in the distance. We couldn't make out what was being said, but it was enough to make our hearts race. Every step we took felt like an eternity, and the tension in the air was palpable. We knew we weren't alone in that forsaken place, and the feeling of being watched never left us. What would we find in the shadows, lurking just out of sight? As we pressed on through the gloomy labyrinth of the abandoned warehouse, the eerie whispers continued to haunt our senses. My partner and I exchanged glances, our faces etched with concern. It was clear that something was amiss here, and it wasn't just the age and decay of the building. Our flashlights cast elongated shadows on the crumbling walls, making every corner seem like a potential hiding place. The echoes of our footsteps reverberated through the vast space, amplifying the feeling of vulnerability that gnawed at us. Suddenly, a door at the far end of the warehouse slammed shut with a deafening crash. My heart leaped into my throat, and my grip on the flashlight tightened. My partner and I moved swiftly toward the source of the noise. Our nerves were on edge. When we reached the door, we hesitated for a moment, exchanging silent communication. With a swift nod, we kicked it open, flooding the room beyond with light. To our surprise, it was empty, devoid of any living soul. The sudden, ghostly slamming of the door remained a mystery. We continued our exploration, finding more unsettling signs that we were not alone. Muffled footsteps echoed from above, but when we checked the upper floors, there was no one to be found. It was as though the warehouse itself was toying with us, playing tricks on our senses. As the night wore on, our nerves were frayed, and the strange occurrences continued. Our radios crackled with static, making communication impossible. We decided to regroup and leave the warehouse, unable to shake the feeling that we were unwelcome guests in this forsaken place. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, but a thick fog had rolled in, enveloping the warehouse like a shroud. We made our way back to our patrol car, our heads spinning with confusion and unease. To this day, I can't explain the events that transpired in that abandoned warehouse. It was as though the building itself had a malevolent presence, one that played tricks on the mind and defied rational explanation. My partner and I never returned to that place, and the mystery of the whispering voices and slamming doors remained unresolved. It was an experience that would haunt me throughout my career, a reminder that sometimes, the unknown can be more terrifying than any criminal we might face. Back when I was patrolling the quiet roads of our town, there was one night that sent shivers down my spine. It started off like any other evening shift, just me and my squad car, and the open road stretching ahead. I was cruising along, keeping an eye out for any traffic violations when I spotted a car pulled over on the shoulder. Nothing too unusual, just a routine stop, or so I thought. I pulled up behind the vehicle and approached the driver's side. The driver, a middle-aged man, looked rattled. His eyes darted around as if he'd seen a ghost, and he had this sweat-soaked shirt clinging to his trembling body. He muttered something about a passenger who was no longer there. I leaned in, trying to understand what had happened. He explained that he had picked up a hitchhiker just a few miles back, a young woman, he said. But here's the strange part. When he turned to talk to her, she was gone. Vanished, like she'd never even been there. The driver's voice quivered as he spoke, and I couldn't help but feel a shiver crawl up my spine too. I knew I had to investigate further. I asked the man to describe the hitchhiker, and his description sent chills down my spine. According to him, she had jet black hair, pale skin, and her eyes were like deep, empty voids. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't find a trace of the mysterious hitchhiker in the car. No belongings, no signs of struggle, nothing. It was as if she had evaporated into thin air. With a sense of unease growing within me, I radioed for backup and informed them about the bizarre situation. They were just as perplexed as I was, but we couldn't leave it at that. We had to dig deeper into this unsettling mystery. As we waited for backup to arrive, I couldn't help but glance around the desolate road, wondering if that mysterious hitchhiker was still out there, watching, waiting, and ready to vanish again. Backup finally arrived, and together we conducted a thorough search of the area. We combed the nearby woods, flashed our flashlights into the darkness, and called out for any signs of the elusive hitchhiker. But it was as if she had merged with the night itself, leaving no trace behind. The driver was visibly shaken, his face drained of color. He kept repeating the same strange details about the hitchhiker's appearance, her empty eyes, and how she had uttered not a single word during the ride. It was almost as if he'd encountered a specter rather than a real person. The investigation led us to a dead end. No one in the vicinity had seen anything unusual, and there was no surveillance footage to review. It was as if the hitchhiker had simply materialized, then dematerialized, leaving behind only fear and confusion. With no other leads to pursue, we reluctantly let the driver go. He drove away with a haunted look in his eyes, his encounter with the vanishing passenger likely etched into his memory forever. Over the following weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in my gut. It was a reminder that, even in the most ordinary of places, inexplicable and eerie events could occur. To this day, I occasionally drive by that same stretch of road, and each time, I can't help but glance at the shoulder, half expecting to see the mysterious hitchhiker once more. But she remains a ghostly enigma, a story I share with my fellow officers to remind them that in our line of work, there are some mysteries that may never be solved. As I reflect on that chilling night, I'm left with a lingering question: who was the vanishing passenger, and what became of her? Perhaps, like the night itself, she continues to drift through the shadows, forever eluding our grasp and leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions.